Well, friends, we did it. We managed to beat what I think is the most difficult run possible in Oxygen Not Included. And that being said, at least without mods or any other... I mean, you could impose all kinds of wild restrictions, but this is the hardest run that I could find that was fully recorded. If you did not watch the series, or if you did not at least watch the first intro video about this, I did an exhaustive search of trying to find the most difficult way to play Oxygen Not Included, at least without mods, or at least without obscene restrictions that would make it eventually impossible, which you could definitely do. But what was this playthrough exactly? Well, I effectively ran through every possible asteroid, ran through all the different types of seed combinations, and came up with the following. Number one, I wanted to play on max difficulty settings in spaced out classic mode on the Oasis asteroid. I felt like this was the most difficult thing we could do, at least the most difficult asteroid configuration, again without mods. And I'm probably not going to mention the mods too much more, but I did get a lot of comments of saying, well, you could have made it harder with this mod, or you could have done this. I just mean like vanilla, regular game, no mods, this is the toughest we could make it. I wanted to also do a run where you were forced to get every single achievement in one run. Some of these are really ridiculous in terms of like the things you have to do and the low resources you have and the strain that's put on you from the duplicates on the highest difficulty, but we managed to do it. We also searched for the worst seeds possible. I went through all of the map traits, generated a whole bunch of maps, and wound up with the following of Metal Pore, Geodormant, Frozen Core, Alternate Pod Location. I used a tool that has a big database full of Oxygen Not Included seeds to find maps that had these, and then picked a seed among, I think it was like 20 or so, randomly to start on and play. So yeah, that was kind of the process of at least getting started. I also did impose a couple of other restrictions. Number one, there is an achievement called Super Sustainable, which means you're not allowed to use natural gas, wood, coal, or petroleum to generate power. I figured since we're not going to be doing it for the achievement, I'm just going to keep that restriction in for the rest of the game. So that was one of the minor challenges, I would say. Another major one is I was not allowed to reroll duplicates. So if there were ever any duplicates that came up and I needed to take another duplicate, I just was forced to take it. It was not like I had to take every single print, because I don't think that would literally be possible. Maybe it would. I don't, like with Locavore and Carnivore and all the other stuff going on, I actually don't think that that would be possible. So the rule that I imposed for myself was basically I can't go scrounging and re-rolling for duplicates. I just have to take whatever it gives me, which is like the very first option when it's time to print one. So that was interesting. We didn't get the worst duplicates, and we'll talk about that one later. I'm also not allowed to lose any duplicates, because if duplicates die, that's a really easy way to ease the difficulty. So I just said no duplicates are allowed to die whatsoever. We had some seriously close calls along the way that almost ended the run several times. But we managed to dodge those, and we were good. I also, by the way, minor thing, turned off story traits, because some of these do give you pretty powerful resources if you're able to complete the stories that they go along with, so I just turned those off. And then I also put in a restriction that I really wasn't sure how it was going to play out, which is I'm not allowed to leave the starting biome until cycle 300. We did stick around in there and eventually stabilized. I think cooling was one of the bigger problems, because on Oasis, you are basically on a clock in terms of like you have to wall it off and then cool your base down in order to be able to grow enough food to keep your duplicates alive. So that was an interesting part of this as well, which we'll talk about the confinement period a little bit later. So like I mentioned, we did it. We got every single achievement in one run. There were no duplicates lost. We did everything that was listed here and eventually completed the game. So if you watch the whole series, I really appreciate you guys that helped me out in terms of like leaving comments and giving me ideas on how to do certain things. That helped out a lot, and we managed to do it on our first try, which I was very surprised by. I thought for sure in the first 100 cycles there were some periods where I was convinced that we were not going to make it. But somehow we did. In terms of like how could we potentially made this harder? I'm actually wondering if there is most definitely harder seeds in this pool that I have. I have not looked at any of them, obviously, because I just took the first one and then rolled with it. But our seed that we got was actually kind of good. Like, it was pretty decent. The traits definitely made it harder. Like, there were a lot less geysers and stuff to work with, but the stuff that we did get was actually pretty beneficial. So it is possible that we could have rolled a harder seed than that and had a more of a struggle. But I don't know. That was pretty interesting. I was also kind of unsure if the irregular oil would have been harder than what we actually rolled with. I think if we maybe did that instead of alternate pod location, it might have made it harder, but we also would have had access to a lot of lead and stuff like that that would have made it a little bit easier. So I don't know. I'm still going back and forth on that. The Oasis portion, where we were basically stuck with all that hot sand and stuff that we can't really use that much, it was definitely a challenge, but I actually think that the oil biomes are a little more hazardous, but the trade-off again is that we get a lot of free refined metal early in the game. So I don't know. I'm still not sure if that one was something that would have been a little bit more difficult than what we did, but maybe I'll try it again sometime. I also am wondering, the most difficult part of the run, by the way, was the point where we had to abide by the locavore, carnivore, and super sustainable achievements. That combo is very difficult, especially on the highest difficulty and especially on this asteroid type. And with all the other silly things that we're doing, that was the hardest part of the run for sure. And that's where I thought we were going to lose it. Once we got past that point, I was fairly confident that we'd be okay as long as I didn't make a mistake and let a duplicate die or something. The only thing that might have made that a little bit more challenging is if there were an asteroid with less critters to work with. Starting in the forest biome definitely gives me access to a good amount of pips, and also the hatches that are in there as well. But my thought process was like, if we're starting in a more temperate biome, there's going to be a lot more hatches, at least as far as I know. And these other asteroids kind of wouldn't make as much sense being confined in the middle. I wouldn't have the heat pressure, so I don't know. I'm a little curious to try some other runs on some of these other asteroids and see if it would have been more difficult there, but I don't know. Definitely, I mean, playing through one of these took me like 3 months, so trying to figure that out would take me a little bit longer than that. One thing that I wanted to mention here is we had to constantly take duplicates that were not by choice. So we had to just take whatever we got. When I was doing my testing a little bit earlier, I played like 2 test runs to make sure that this was actually something feasible and that I understood what I needed to do to get those first few achievements. So I'd play through maybe like 30 cycles and then start over and play another 30 cycles, just to kind of get the rhythm down and figure out like what my big issues would be during the actual run, like the recorded run. One of them that was a huge problem that I still don't know how I would have dealt with is a glow stick dupe. Sometimes you can get these, and these will effectively be throwing up and stressed out, irradiated. It'll irradiate your other dupes. It's a disaster. This is by far the worst duplicate for this run, and somehow we managed to miss that with all 25 duplicates that we printed. So that one would have made it a lot more difficult if we were to land a glow stick duplicate. If I were to do this challenge again, I might force myself to take one of these because they are a huge problem in the testing that I did. Definitely worth playing around with, but yeah, that was a good thing to dodge. So yeah, in this first 100 cycles, a lot of very close calls with food. We barely got our achievements on time. We got carnivore with like 10% of the last day left. Bubbles was just chugging barbecue and getting us in there at the last minute. We're also had some periods where we were very low on oxygen, and I wasn't very confident that we were going to be able to turn our food situation around because we were running out of water. Lots of really tight corners to turn there, but we managed to get that. There was also a lot of stress reactions that were causing a ton of problems while this was all going on. So, like, duplicates would be breaking stuff, or they would be eating all the food, which is a huge problem back then. So yeah, or they'd just be crying on the ground, and yeah, cause all other kinds of problems. The funny thing, actually, is that duplicants getting their feet wet is such a big problem in this. So if one duplicant was like vomiting, or if they peed their pants, or if they cried on the floor, that was actually kind of a big deal, because I was having to really micro the stress of all my duplicants and put the ones that were right near the edge of their stress reactions on like a follow cam to get the extra 5% stress reduction. It was pretty silly, and if I recorded those whole sessions, it would look like I had no idea what I was doing. But that's just because I was doing the things that absolutely had to be done, and it was probably not a pleasant viewing experience at all. Just having me like pause the game, go do something, and then like follow cam on a duplicant for 2 cycles straight. It's pretty silly. What was recorded was a lot of like micro situations. The egg juggling that I had to do was especially a big problem. And in general, I just had to do like the minimal amount of planning possible and just throw stuff where it needed to go to make sure that it was going to get in there. So it's actually kind of interesting. Like, a lot of times the organization of the base is not necessarily the most efficient thing to do. So it's kind of like if you're watching like a really high level RTS player or something like that. They'll just place their buildings in like the most optimal spots, but it'll look really chaotic and disorganized, but it actually is sometimes the best option. So I was definitely seeing some of that with the early game of the base that I was running. It was messy, but it got the job done. Let's see. The extra difficulty eventually just kind of slowed the game down for a long time. I think if we were to do this on more regular difficulty, the run would have probably been maybe half as long, only because I'd be able to afford more dupe labor. And there'd be less concern about them wasting time, being stressed out, or reducing their stress, or those kinds of things. So, yeah, I think the extra difficulty outside of the first 100 or maybe even 300 cycles really just kind of slowed the game down. I didn't notice it that much by the end. The only thing that was a constant issue was radiation. Radiation's a big deal in these, and there were some seriously close calls, especially because I was running a highly irresponsible radiation-based strategy in this. So if you had a duplicant that was messing around near the radiation for too long, it was really scary. I had some of them in like the 250s or 280s in terms of radiation absorption, and if they're not taking rad pills and they get over 300, that duplicant is just dead. There's no way you can save them. Which I kind of actually hope that they fix at some point, but yeah, that was really scary. I know that those are definitely instances where the game could have just ended, but I fortunately managed with a lot of door micro, like preventing duplicants from going past certain doors when they are irradiated already. We managed to get through all that without any serious incidents, so yeah. Let's see. Another thing I could have done that was actually a really good idea that I had not realized before is that you can plan their schedule so that they'll take more bathroom breaks during the day. And bathrooms are actually very critical for getting your oxygen up when you have basically no other resources. So if I were to do this again, what I wound up doing in the run was hoarding a lot of morbs. We had tons of them. I think the count was like around 300 at some point. And that's what was going to be producing our oxygen for us. But if I were to do this again, I would probably go with the heavy bathroom break schedule and use the, I never remember what this is called, use the polluted dirt in the machine that makes oxygen to make all the oxygen for us, because it would have kept the pressure up really nicely. And I was dealing with polluted oxygen anyway, but I wouldn't have to wait so much for the morbs to produce it in such a small amount. The other annoying thing with the morbs is, like, if you play on a slower speed, the morbs are better, which I don't even know why that's still a thing. That should have definitely been fixed a long time ago, because that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But anyway. So since we did have all the polluted oxygen, we were basically just running a polluted oxygen base for a long time. The key with the morbs is they put out a lot of slime lung in there, and if you do get slime lung outbreaks on this type of difficulty and with the achievements that you need to get, it's rough. It might just end the game because your duplicants will be so unproductive. So we used shine bugs to clean that up and to kill all the germs in there, and that was pretty clever, and it worked out pretty well. So I was happy about that. The shine bugs were definitely our homies throughout the entire playthrough. Without the shine bugs and the morbs, we probably would have not made it at all. And that was definitely the centerpiece of our oxygen production in the early game. So the confinement period, this is basically the restriction that I put on myself that I'm not allowed to leave the starting biome until cycle 300. I had no idea how this is going to go. I had never tested it before. It went okay. Like I said, cooling was the biggest issue here. But if I were to do this again, I probably would have ran with a different restriction, like being forced to take a certain number of duplicants or having to take the worst duplicant that's offered, or maybe even just having to finish the run within a set amount of time. I think those would have been a little bit more interesting than the confinement period. But I don't know. It was at least still a unique challenge that I don't think I've really seen before. So that was pretty fun. Let's see. We did do a strategy with an early aqua tuner, and we didn't have a great way to deal with any of the hot, like water or steam or whatever that an aqua tuner would typically result in. So we came up with a pretty clever solution, which was to just dump a ton of debris in the water that would be effectively absorbing the heat from the aqua tuner, so that we could have a small amount of cooled water somewhere, and then we would have a steadily warming tank of water. But because we dumped, like, I don't even know how much, it was probably like 200 tons of material in this one area just to absorb all the heat, our water that was supposed to get really hot actually didn't rise that much because most of that energy was being put into all the other debris that was in there. We wound up with a pool of water that was like 42 C or something like that, which is pretty good, because otherwise if you run an aqua tuner for that long, you're just going to get steam, and without plastic or any way to leave the biome, we didn't have another way to deal with that. So that was actually pretty interesting. Definitely not something I've done before, is make an aqua tuner out of something other than steel, which we also didn't have. And then absorbing all the heat with just a bunch of stuff in there was pretty effective. So let's see. The next phase was basically breaking out of the center and getting out on the map. I got pretty fortunate, I think, with the water geysers that I got. Stumbling upon a cool slush geyser like immediately is super strong for this type of run, especially on a map that's already really hot. So that was a very pleasant surprise. There was actually more water than I really knew what to do with. Like, there was another water geyser that was pretty warm, so water was never a concern, which otherwise could have been a pretty big concern being geodormant if we just did not get very fortunate rolls with what kind of water production we had. We could have been on a totally different strategy at that point, like a Huff farm or something like that, but we would have had to leave the asteroid pretty early to go get one. I don't even know what we would have done. We did have to get Drecos pretty early to start getting our plastic and our reed fibers and that kind of stuff up. But yeah, breaking out was a little bit more easy than I thought. We basically just plowed our way through the areas that were not enough to damage our duplicants. Duplicants won't start taking damage from heat until about 72 Celsius, something like that. So the fact that a lot of this we could kind of weave in and out of the hot parts was pretty fortunate. So that was pretty helpful. Let's see. There was another thing that we did, which is ethanol cooling. I've never done this before, and boy, is it inefficient. There is a reason that steam turbines and aqua tuners are basically the gold standard for cooling, and that's because other stuff like this, and if you don't know about it, basically the idea with ethanol cooling is like the heat capacity of ethanol gas is way lower than the heat capacity of ethanol liquid. So when it transitions between a gas and a liquid, effectively a ton of heat is deleted. It's this and the nuclear waste that both have these properties, but it is incredibly inefficient. One of which meaning that, like, you're not getting the extra power boost from the steam turbines, but the other problem is, like, not that much heat gets deleted from this ethanol cooling solution, so you wind up just running at, like, barely a surplus in terms of cooling power. So yeah, that was interesting to do, but I would not recommend that. It is incredibly inefficient. We also did kind of an interesting shipping setup. I actually got a comment about this a long time ago. I can't remember what series it was for. I think it was for the base game walkthrough. I was talking about shipping stuff back to the center of the base, which I still advocate for the most part. But somebody left a comment there and was like, hey, why don't you set up a chain that is an auto sweeper and a automatic dispenser, and just put them on a chain so you can ship stuff from far away back to the center of the base really fast. And I was like, huh, okay. I mean, I don't really need all the material there that fast. So like, that's not the biggest concern that I have on like a regular map, because we don't have to venture across like a huge wasteland of nothing before we can get it. So picking it up or shipping it slowly is usually fine. And it's less work, honestly. But this was a case where I thought it might be interesting to show, and also a case where we mined out an area that had a lot of really valuable resources that I wanted in the middle, like as soon as possible. So we set up this shipping chain, whatever you want to call it. It was pretty cool. So I thought that was one of the more neat setups, and it's kind of niche still. Again, it's very efficient in terms of like getting stuff there fast, but it uses up a lot of power. It takes a while to build, and you also do have to manage it yourself in terms of like making sure you remember to turn the automated dispensers on and off. Kind of a weird setup, but it is pretty neat. I think I did use it a few more times to help cool like mass amounts of material all at once, so yeah, it was pretty interesting. The other thing is, this is the first time I've ran grubs at this type of scale, and they are really good. I did not know that they were that strong in terms of like the type of benefits that they could put out. So I would just say generally, if you're playing spaced out and you have a source of sulfur, you might as well just get some of these things, especially if you want to run a larger colony. If you're running a smaller colony and you have plenty of resources, it's not that big a deal. But if you're like really skimping and you're having to save on resources, but you have sulfur, these things are good. I would definitely recommend doing it. Material cooling. I did also do this a little bit differently than I have done in the past. Typically what I would do with material cooling is I would run like a shipping line through a bunch of cold liquid just to cool all the stuff that's coming from like a hotter biome. But this time I just dumped it all in one place. I just dumped it all in a cold pool of water, and then eventually regulated that water temperature and the material temperature, and then shipped it out. It was a lot more efficient than what I typically do, so I may do this again in the future. The other thing that I did was just ship everything to the center and then cool the center. So it was like, all of our stuff is sitting there already, we might as well just cool that. And it makes it pretty easy. Like, I don't need to make a separate setup for something like that. The only reason it would be a concern is if you're pulling it out of a super hot biome and it's going into, like if it's going past your food or something like that. You don't want like 70, 80 degree material floating past all of your bristle blossoms or something, because it's just gonna make them stop growing and it'll kill all of your food production. So that would be a reason to not do that, but you can a lot of times just kind of be lazy about it like this and be kind of efficient. So I don't know, I might use this again in the future. So once we got out of that asteroid, it was basically like the space age, and we went to some other asteroids. The funny thing that we did, and this was not necessary, this was just an in-run for fun thing to do, was we decided to not use the teleporters to get to the other asteroid, which is usually the first one that you visit. We decided to fly there and be forced to fly there, which is way less efficient. But I just made it even harder on ourselves by crash landing on the asteroid and not having anything to live out of. So my duplicates had to like burrow their way into the asteroid and find a way to survive after effectively crash landing on the planet. That was actually a lot of fun. If there were more scenarios like that, or I don't know, maybe an achievement or something, like maybe there's a planet where you're not allowed to fly and nearby or something like that, and you have to crash land. I think that'd be really fun, because that was a cool challenge. Especially if you don't have any means of like shipping yourself extra stuff. So it's like, we not only have to crash land there, we have to immediately become self-sustaining. It was pretty neat. I thought that was a lot of fun. Let's see. Once we got on that asteroid, the Saturn critter traps, we did a setup with the betas, which is pretty common. They are absolutely busted. These are the most overtuned thing in the entire game. Once we got this hydrogen production set up, it basically funded our power production for the entire game. This was absurd. Like, I didn't even have to think about power anymore. There's so much. And even if you load into one of the later saves, I think later in the, like at the very end, My density of hydrogen in this huge room was like 1,200 kilograms per tile, which is ridiculous. If you're ever even at like 2 kilograms per tile, that's a lot. Never mind like 500 times more than that. So it's pretty crazy. I did actually think of a solution for that. So if we're looking to patch this for quality of life type of things, I actually think that the amount of hydrogen that should be produced should be dependent on the critter that it eats. So we already do this with like meat and eggs and stuff like that. Every type of critter puts out a different amount of meat. So like the shovels put out like 16,000 calories of meat. It's crazy. But a lot of other things put out like maybe 1/10 of that. So if they did the same type of ratios for hydrogen output with the Saturn critter traps, I actually think that that would be a lot more reasonable, so that you would still get a lot of use out of it, but it wouldn't just take over your entire production. This is just one regular biome with one beta hive and one cool slush geyser powering all of this. So if you ever have those two things in combination, which are very common, or you could just run it with morbs that I've done in the past, you basically just get free power for the rest of the game and that's it. It's so busted. So yeah, I definitely think that, like, we obviously use that because it's very good to use and it's very good to show, but from just a design standpoint, I want it to be less powerful. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. The other thing that I did was run an entirely radiation-based rocket system. So we used all of our shine bugs and kind of shoved them into one little spot so that we would get hilarious amounts of radiation production off of them, and they would fund all of our rocketry. So we didn't make a rocket out of anything other than carbon dioxide. So it was only carbon dioxide and radiation rockets. I don't like these, honestly. It's pretty interesting that you can do this, but the biggest issue with this is it causes so much state change and so much waste that it makes for like a super overly complicated rocket setup that's like not that great. It's like actually pretty power negative, all things considered. So I don't know if I'd really do this again, especially on the scale that we did. I just overdid it with the amount of rockets that we had and how many rockets we're going to have out mining at the time so we could speed through the achievement, but very impractical and a super huge drain on resources. I would definitely, well, not resources, on performance. I would definitely not do that again, so once and then never again, at least at that scale for sure. Another thing is capturing the gassy moves. This is always an interesting asteroid to settle on, but I still don't get the point of bracking. Like, there's a bunch of applications for it, but then by the time you've already gotten this, it's like, why? I don't know what the point is. People were saying some interesting things, like you could basically automate all of your ranching. I haven't tested that for sure, but it still feels like it would be a little bit less efficient than having your duplicates do it, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But yeah, bracking. I don't know. That's one of those, another one of those late game things. It's like you get it up and then it barely has any effect on what you're doing because you've already solved the problems that it's supposed to be solving. If there were an asteroid that basically started you with gassy moves and that was like a center of your strategy, that'd be a lot cooler, but I don't know. This is like one of the first times I've started interacting with it, but I still don't see what it solves. I guess it's neat, but at least if you're trying to, you know, play super hard and just beat the game, I don't know. I don't really see the point. Another thing that I did for the first time ever is building a research reactor. These are crazy, and they're very strong, especially if you have a source of enriched uranium. This is definitely something I would say that if you're looking to get a radiation source and a power source up, and you have access to all the things, it's actually pretty cool. It's again one of those, like, at least by the time that I did it, it's not really solving any problems because we had already solved our radiation and our power issues. But if this was a centerpiece of a strategy and you were on an asteroid that was like full of uranium and a way to enrich it, it'd be pretty cool. I actually like this a lot. I thought that was fun. One other thing is basically, I put up a poll, and this poll was hilariously close through the entire time. It was basically 50-50 up until the last, like, I don't know, 100 votes or something like that, when it barely split off into like 52-48. But the question that I asked was, do you want to see me colonize all the other asteroids, or do you want me to just grab the artifacts and go? Grabbing the artifacts and going is fairly interesting, but in general, I actually think it's a lot more fun overall to colonize things. I didn't do it only because the series was going long and I kind of want to work on other videos. And I've also done this before, so I'd probably be doing the exact same, well, not the exact same thing, but a very similar thing to what I've done in my spaced out walkthrough, where I colonize every asteroid, which is not necessary. At least if you want to get all the achievements, you can just do what I did in this one and just break in there and grab them. But I did think that if they're looking for more quality of life stuff, and at least for more things to do, it would be nice if there was like a special machine that opened like a vault or something like that, and your duplicates had to operate this machine for like, I don't know, 20 or 30 cycles straight, which would, I mean, obviously it could maybe have some interruptions or something like that, but the point being is like it would force you to live there for a while just to open the vault to get the artifacts. So if they're looking for ideas or quality of life stuff, I actually think that that would be a lot more interesting than just having the artifacts like sitting around. But I also don't know how many people get to this phase of the game, or if it's really worth like adding a quality of life feature that a lot of people never even see, so I don't know. But I thought that that would be a little bit more interesting to at least force you to plan out like, how am I going to live in this place while I try to bust in and get the artifact? Or if you could just have to do that before you get access to a printing pod or something like that would be interesting. But I don't know. Yeah, so that kind of covers all the phases, and that's gonna basically be it for this. So, in summary, we invented a very hard challenge for ourselves, and then we completed it. This series was a lot of fun. I wanted to do it in a style where people could respond back with comments and stuff, and the comments were extremely helpful throughout this series. And thank you very much to everybody who watched the whole thing. I can't believe you guys are that into watching this. And I only say that from the standpoint of like, I'm one of those people where if I say something, I can't believe that somebody's understanding what I'm saying. Maybe that's just a me problem, but this is kind of in that vein. Like, I'm just kind of doing my thing and playing the game, so I'm surprised that so many people find it that interesting. But yeah, I'll keep putting out videos for as long as you guys are interested in them. There's a lot more series that are going to be coming up here pretty soon, so yeah. Thanks again. Also, huge thanks and shout out to my wife, who is sitting next to me while we are recording. She's getting bashful, but she has helped out so much with adding animations, artwork, running all the sticker stuff, a lot of the fun stuff around here that just makes the channel, you know, more vibrant, more alive. She's definitely responsible for that, so that was a lot of fun, and I appreciate her help. So she stuck her tongue out at me. All right, I think I'm gonna call that good for this video. Again, the whole series is there if you haven't watched it. If you're looking for something to second screen or fall asleep to or whatever, lots of content there if you like to hear me talk. And if you don't, that's also fine. But yeah, we'll be back with a lot more videos, a lot more probably challenge runs, but I think I'm gonna do some more like new player advice type of things. We'll probably cover some exploits and some funny stuff too. So yeah, we'll be back here really soon. All right, I don't know how to sign out. All right, bye.